everybody. I am so excited tonight to have my good friend and talented artist, Sally Strand, talk about her work tonight. She did come at the very beginning of COVID when we just started having guest artists come. I wanted to tell you, I met Sally, I can't remember, it was a long time ago, probably about 30 years ago, when I got a scholarship to study with her at the Scottsdale Artist School. It might have been between 30 and 40. And I was amazed then by her sense of color and light and the glow from within, and I still feel that. In reading what she wrote about her work, she wrote, I relate to the small moments of life that are often overlooked, often experienced by the people most significant to me, portrayed in subtle, suggestive narratives. They bring together my interest in abstract shapes and formal space, combined with naturalistic figures and the many nuances of light. I attempt to explore the emotion and mood as a form of visual poetry. More specifically, in terms of what she's specifically done, she's a California artist for 40 years, having exhibited that long, inducted into the Hall of Fame, the highest commendation of the Pastel Society of America, honored with the International Association of Pastel Society's highest designation, the Eminent Pastelist, the PSA Master Pastelist distinction, and IAP's Master Circle medal, and I can go on and on and on. She's shown widely, including a one-man retrospective at the Bakersfield Museum of Art in California, widely published, lots of museums in their collection. She studied at the American Academy of Art in Chicago, the Art Students League, I'm jealous, the National Academy of Design in New York, getting a BFA from the University of Denver, and MFA from the Laguna College of Art and Design. And she has taught workshops and master classes internationally. And I am just going to pass this on to Sally. And Sally's going to talk for a while and then entertain questions. So Sally, hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me back. I had so much fun when I was here in the beginning. And I think in the beginning, when you first were doing this, I didn't show slides. We just talked. So this time I'm going to, Sandra asked me a few things that were interesting to her. So I'm going to go do a slideshow, like I said, and if it works, I have a short demo in there, and I'm going to speed it through. It's going to be fast so that we have time just to see the first half of the painting, but you'll get the feel of some of my process. Like she said, then we'll take a break, and then I'm going to talk about a little more of the more current things that happened in the progression of all these decades that I've been working. So I'm going to try to share my screen and do a little PowerPoint. Tell me if you can see this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. And this box is covering up where I need to, let me try it a different way. It's covering up the toolbar where I need to view. Let's try it this way. Okay, I think that works. Do you just see me on the floor?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, you know, my career starts back before we had computers, before we had anything. You can see the slides up in the corner on the left. So I started in a whole different visual time period. And if you see my table behind me, there's so much stuff on the table that I was putting things on the floor to do big sweeping watercolor at the time, which is what I first started doing. And then it progressed. You could see that I was stretching watercolor paper, and eventually I started doing some pastel over the watercolor. But I was a watercolor painter first at the American Academy of Art in Chicago. Eventually, I started putting pastel strokes. I got a small set that was given to me. I didn't know what to do with them. It really, in those days, pastel was more of a student learning tool in schools than the Pastel Society of America was just really being formed about that time. So I kind of grew up with it and grew into it. And there were not many options at the time about papers and materials. But eventually, you can see I also started working in oil and putting it on the wall, and now I have a much bigger easel. I don't have to climb a ladder and go up and down on a wall, but I'm just showing you a little corner of studio. And in the beginning, okay, since I was a watercolorist, I sat 3 months by a window with natural light coming through. And this is a very small little thing, but you can see the watercolor texture. And I learned so much by sitting there and doing these tiny little uh, uh, compositions, because I learned how to draw. I learned how to see. I learned how to use my eyes. I learned how to compare. I learned how to compose. What's the back plane? What's the foreground? All these things that I had heard about in art school but didn't really get until I sat and just started painting things from the refrigerator. Then at some point, I recognized that there's a difference between small and large scale. So when things are small, it calls the viewer to walk up closer and enter a world that's sort of intimate. But when things become very large, this was 5 feet now, it's oversized. And I was looking through water at some eggs that I put in a bowl and looking at the reflections. And I thought, what would happen if I did this really large and it was on watercolor paper stretched to a board? You can see the texture perhaps, but my interest was becoming light. You could see the light coming through and just kissing the top of these eggs and going through the bowl. Here I'm just showing you the scale and the size. And when scale changes, the whole concept changes. So it becomes somewhat more abstract images, larger shapes. And that's another painting. This is a gallery that these are held. You can see how big it is by the little sculpture on the left. That's me standing in front of it, so you can get the size of scale at the National Arts Club Pastel Society of America. And then, you know, I was focused for years. I still am, but really on light itself and what it did to compositions, not just form, but what it said. And I later learned that it had meaning in art history, but I didn't know that at this point. I was thinking of things purely formally and purely compositionally. Here's I was invited to do lots of books and so on, lots of step by step. So I'm going to show you one that was way back when, but very large. And I did it on a wall, not realizing that when it's reproduced in a book, it's very small. I didn't need to work that big. But anyway, I laid in the shapes with charcoal. I was in California at this point. I'm from Colorado, but I was in California, and all these people with the beach and all the different things that they had. This was watercolor paper cut from a roll and attached to a board and sprayed down with a hose to get the sizing off. You can see my initial underpainting just to get rid of the white. I then changed how I did all kinds of underpaintings as I went through the years. But here I was starting to lay in the shadows to the dark and trying to figure out where to crop this. And I was learning so much about composition, where the hand, I made up all the towels and the boxes and things down below that hand and behind. There's so many angles and things, but then, and I made up the light that's all down there in the front that wasn't there. But I looked and I thought, oh, see all those feet, the awkward shapes. And then I decided it needed I was thinking abstractly and more formally that it needed weight. And so I just covered them up, covered them up with a bigger shape. This is a basket that I had, but leading the direction over and the light taking you up and then taking it up higher, as you can see, taking up the darks to the darks and the light to the light and different angles and things, taking you back in space. I'm showing you this early piece that was figurative for me. It's big, but I had gone from those little still lifes to wanting to paint these people on the beach. But I'm showing you this because I was not aware at the time of the light source effect on color. And I was viewing this source. I made up the chair. I made up these guys in shadow and the pole connecting it to the top. But you can see how orange my sense of color was for the flesh because I was viewing this source with a little handheld slide viewer. I don't know if you remember how you put a slide in there and push the top and the light would come on. So the bulb was very orange. And so later, when I went to New York City and walked into the Art Students League and looked way down the way at the model on the model stand, and the light was North Light, cool. I was so shocked at the color. And that's when I first became aware of the difference, the effect of the light source on color. Okay, so here again, I was viewing her with a bulb that was very orange. Later, my lights became a lot more cool based on the light source. Now I have in my studio here a North Light. I don't paint children a lot, but in children, it isn't I was looking for an S curve here, and I made up, again, there were all these feet underneath the bench. And so I covered it up with the towels and was using light to go up. And where would I crop the figure at the top? And what would the background be? I didn't want people to go outside the background. I wanted to make them look in front. So I learned that from the little still lifes. So the back I made dark, even though it doesn't mean anything, but it causes you to look in the front. I'm a swimmer. I swim laps. And so I'm always fascinated by life and things around me. I'm just always observing life. And so I look down through water, and you saw me paint those eggs. I was looking through water, and I was interested in how water would refract the colors and the light of people as they were swimming. So I did a whole series, but you can see the effect of using more paint, and just the pastel on the top is indicating the water by highlights. What I'm showing you here are pieces from series. I have so many series. So I just picked out some series of things from which I was learning as I was thinking about different art concepts along the way. This one, you can see how simplified I was making the shadow shape in the face, but I was just showing it to you for the strokes. I was flattening the space behind this head. And if I was oil painting, I would have set those shapes back with oil paint, glaze, with a glaze. Well, how do you do that with a pastel? So I started doing, my work became very stroke oriented, a lot of cross hatching, a lot of using the end of the pastel. And I think you can see the vibrancy of creating color and value using strokes and cross hatching there. And then I started thinking I would like to get movement into these static images of figures. I'm not very interested in hiring models. I'm more interested in real people and real life and just the moment. So, but I'd been looking at Soroya and how he took models down to the beach at 5 o'clock with the most beautiful light. So this time I did hire this model and we went down there. And I was also looking at old masters, and I made up this towel to have a sense of movement with the wind, and the light on the back of that shirt is what captured me. Also, that her leg counter is countered. Well, it's weighted over here on the left with my basket again. So it creates a triangular composition, which is one of the most stable shapes. Just to show you a variety of underpainting, I often underpaint with complementary color. And so you can see here, for example, the man in the middle, I knew his shirt, his sweater, jacket was going to be red. I underpainted it with green. So it's all complementary color underpainting with watercolor at that time. I also have a whole series of, I called it the player series. First, it started with men in white. I was walking along one day and I saw a whole 80 people dressed in white and they were lawn bowling. It wasn't that I was interested in lawn bowling. In fact, this painting actually has a ball and a racket, but that's rare. I'm more interested in the gesture, the way they are interacting, and usually they're not even interacting. They're in their own world. And I was looking at how Caravaggio handled light. And I put them against a dark background to set the light off. And I was also thinking about how at a certain time when the camera came in, you started to see figures cropped. And so I put this figure on the right, just stepping into the composition. So I tried a lot of things. This was very big piece. But at some point, I was really feeling, I think in art, we go along, we grow, then we hit a plateau or we hit, well, I'll call it a plateau. I just felt like something had to change, but I wasn't sure what. And I decided it was my palette. I didn't want to paint the Impressionist palette at the time anymore. I didn't want the blues and the pinks and the purples. And so I tried doing things with pastel and underpainting that were more tonal, old master painting. So I took the same subject. Here's people at lawn bowling taking a break, but I took paint on a rag and I rubbed it into the back to make it look more like a painting. So that, and I left that. The pastel and the shadows very thinly applied, which is an old pastel technique. So you really are kind of looking through layers to the ground, and it's built up in the light. Here I'm just showing you a couple of slides for reference material, how I take different figures, like this man in the middle, for example. It's just the figures, it's not the ball that I'm interested in. The man behind the stooping man with his arms folded. I took him out. I started to sketch. You can see I always start things with thinking very abstractly. And to the lower left, I was thinking, how am I going to do this value structure? I reduce everything to three major value shapes. And that's really hard. Just three or four, but usually it's three, but it makes for a stronger composition. So in the lower left, I was like, should I make these figures grouping against dark, like I had done in the ones I just showed you? What if I reversed it and made them, though they're in white, dark against light? So that was my thinking as I was trying to figure this out. And you can see from the reference materials that I had turned the figures around, which meant I had to redo the light on them because the light was coming the other way. But yeah, so this was really a big change for me. And I put the umbrella, I made that up to be dark to set his hat off. And I was pleased because this won a top award at Pastel Society of America that year. And it was something of a change for me. I wasn't painting what I saw, but I was interpreting a little more. And so here is my sketchbook. You can see in the middle there, I started painting a composition of a man reading a newspaper. And I thought, you see how I have the box going horizontally too? I was thinking, what if I crop it this way? These little thumbnails are no more than about 2 or 3 inches, and I do them fast. It's thinking on paper like a writer would do a rough draft. That's what we as artists do. So here, along that same line of working more tonally with a master pastel palette, here I rubbed on oil paint, I think with a rag. You can see it over my drawing. And I think this was done on Reeves BFK, so it's very thin. And I gessoed the back so that it wouldn't roll. And I started blocking in the darks, but I saw a lot of abstract shapes there. This is the old train station in LA. And now I realize, I painted a lot of people reading newspapers, love the shape. And now nobody reads newspapers. But anyway, I made up a lot of things in this composition. Here's a quick shot of a gallery that I was in for years in New York, in Manhattan. And this is my show. And you can see kind of this variety of scale, of sizes. And in those days, the galleries wanted us to frame very simply. Works on paper were framed with this simple molding and matting. So we've changed a lot in the pastel world. Here you can see the sizes a little bit better. And this painting on the left was a chef's painting that the Grand Hyatt Hilton bought and built a wall to put at the end of their table. But you can see there's a lot of underneath painting, and the pots and pans, that's acrylic paint created with acrylic washes like smoke. And so I left that. I pieced this together. I didn't see it this way. I pieced it together from many resources. And I'm so sad that chefs no longer wear hats like these. Now they're more shaped. They're not as fun and billowy, but I was thinking about the light inside there. And what was on the front, the very front, is just all paint. I left that. By the way, in a pastel journal right now, this current summer season has a article that they asked me to write and use this painting, if you get that magazine. So here was the way they had it for years. Now that restaurant is no longer, and the chef took home the painting, the head chef. He's been in touch with me, so it lives somewhere in Manhattan. Then I went through a phase of painting from black and white. Now, these were the days when we didn't have the ability to take a picture on a digital phone or camera and flip it to value. So I was developing my own film in the bathtub, with the door closed and everything. And going around LA, just taking pictures. And I put this away for 10 years. I couldn't figure out how to do this subject matter with an impressionist palette. It didn't work until I changed to a more neutral palette. And so you can see that the color has a lot to do with the emotional side of what you choose to portray. I painted a lot of urban scenes of I didn't even realize what it was at the time. Now I understand. I was interested in painting people at work, at leisure, um, at rest. I'm always watching people. And so now I realize I have a whole long history of painting people working. This was a tailor there in New York City. And my gallerist at the time said, well, I can't sell a painting with a bald head. And she was completely wrong because, well, I have a whole story around that, but this woman who bought it said it was her Italian grandfather, his watch, his tie, and they wouldn't let me borrow it or anything. It was for a museum show. And anyway, I made up all this stuff in the front and I laid under that table for hours on the floor they let me stay in there, take pictures. It was interesting. So I lived in Chicago for a while. I lived in New York and I was on subway tracks all the time watching people. And so I did various paintings of figures of people waiting. I'm interested again in the gesture. And this was LA and this gentleman coming up out of the subway. And I loved the fact that the light was from behind, which put his face in profile, which I thought was very beautiful with all these interesting abstract shapes all around him. And then I started painting in oil. And at some point, I'll tell you why, but when the painting, I was shipping paintings back and forth to my gallery in New York, and they were huge and they were pastel. And at this point, gallerists were telling me it's okay to start to introduce another medium to your public as long as they're of equal technical skills. So this one is an oil painting. And the bigger paintings now I stopped doing with pastel and I went to oil paint. So this is really big. And I used to do them that big with pastel. But again, it's the theme here of someone working, but the beauty of the light. And I was so fascinated with all the shapes. I've also done a lot of experimenting about light itself. What direction is it coming from? What is it saying to us? Well, this was backlit. I'd done a bunch of fruit and vegetables backlit, but this was a tough one. She was stepping into the room but the outside was light. I had to get the light to jump off of her head. And when you do backlight, it throws the color into the shadow, which is also a reversal. So I was really have been interested in light of all different kinds. I have a whole series of beds, and one day I was in Hawaii teaching a workshop. I opened the curtain and the massive light came in on this. So I have a whole series of beds with light, and I also did some with different kinds of light. I used it with indirect light, all kinds of things. But beds have been an interesting subject for me as well as the people in them or getting up out of them. So this is just the moment of getting up with the shaft of light. But you can see that the background and the shadows are pretty much just rubbed in with paint and very little pastel. All right, so now I was going to show you, this is a little demo that I did at IAPS the last time. I've usually presented there every year. This year I decided to just go and enjoy. But this was from a class I was teaching about how to end a painting. And I did a quick little video for them on the start of a painting. So I thought I'd show it to you. Now, hang on to your seat because it's going to go fast. I hope it doesn't make you nauseous or anything. But I will also probably try to go through part of it a little faster, just for the sake of our timing here. So I set up of a simple still life. Now here is my sketchbook and that wonderful tote thing on the back on the sketchbook. I can carry pens and pencils in it. But I'm just showing you how the sketchbook is where I think. And I do reams of these little thumbnails, reducing everything to 3 values because it makes for abstract underneath realism. You have to get that big picture. So here I'm just laying in the upper left is my subject matter there, but I did this from life, so maybe a little different than looking at it from a photo. These are Tombow pens. I usually, for years, just did it with pencil. But a very quick thought process. What is the big structure, the big composition? If you can't get somebody to walk across the room and look at that, that's what makes for a powerful composition, is that big, small structure of your masses. So then when I draw, I sharpen the sharpen the charcoal to a real fine point. I'm measuring there. That's why my hand is going back and forth, because I'm looking at it across the room. And when I block in, it's not to make a great drawing. I'm going to paint all over it. I'll probably use the paint. I'll lose the original drawing. This is placement. So I'm just placing in for you, for myself, the big shapes. Again, very abstract, big masses. Where are they in relationship to one another, and how do they fit on the page? Where am I cropping? How do they relate weight and size? And notice I'm doing it all with straight lines. Blocking in, I learned in art school, and I've done it ever since, that the best thing to do is do it with straight lines, because it gives you direction, even though these are circular. You know, I got them in there with straight lines. I think what I'm going to do here, just to save a little time, is make it go even a little faster through this time. And you can just see it. So real light lines in the beginning. I'm moving them around. I'm not, I have a chamois in my other hand. I'm wiping it down if it's not right. I don't let it be precious. These are big masses relating to one. Oh, so sorry. Let me go forward. Relating to one another. Just the big masses. And then as I go, then I make the lines a little darker, so that when I go to paint, I can see the lines underneath the paint. But overall, I'm leaving it very loose, and I'm not worried about the drawing, because I'm going to change it as I go. This is painterly that way, so I'm not making a colored drawing and filling it in. So now the lines got darker. Okay, so there's my basic block in. Now with the charcoal, now I move to paint usually. I mean, in the early days, I never knew about underpainting. I just came upon it because I was a watercolorist and started doing some strokes of pastel over it. But here I'm using gouache. And for years, I used up my watercolor because I was a watercolorist. But you can see here that I've more recently started using gouache for a variety of reasons, which is kind of a tricky medium. There's white in it, and it dries very differently. But I'm doing here complementary color underpainting. So, you know, those oranges are now painted blue. But I'm thinking, and I have out my value sketch, and I'm following that as to what the big picture was in my value sketch. And then I start, once that's in, then I start adding light and the shadow shapes. That simple, no detail, big blocky shapes. And it's just a guess. I'm trying to get the values and the relationships one to another, because good painting is all comparison. That's all it is. It's comparing one thing to one shape and value and color to another. You have to learn to use your eyes to do a lot of comparison. So here with gouache, I've got white in there that I'm using, but you can see how dark, even with white, it dries. But I'm making big relationships of the masses one to another, which is lighter, which is darker, what's the general color family roughly. Now I'm going to start thinking about that as well as the values, putting in some shadows here. Big shadow shapes. And they run into other shadow shapes. I'm squinting a lot to make sure I don't look at too many details. The hardest part is to keep it big, and the details come later. I'm doing what I learned about watercolor is to have a damp sponge on your tray, and you dip into the water and then get the excess out of your brush. So that's what I'm doing, going back and forth. I'm mixing grays. Now I'm starting to kind of indicate what the light, the actual color family is, the blue, but I'm leaving it so that I can see the underpainting, and it becomes a little more interesting than flat color because it's a little bit more broken color, and I'm just letting the paint slide over the underpaint. You can see how gouache darkens as you go, so it's a little tricky. You have to think ahead that it's going to do that. So at this point, you know, it can look kind of like mud, but I'm still thinking value, big swatches and big shapes of value. And I'm starting to build up some color. Hey, see, now the light is jumping right off because of what happened in the shadow relative to the shadow. Now with gouache, it's going to go a little darker. So I just keep building and keep changing the color. I'm going to warm up the shadows right there. But still it has to maintain the correct value so that the shadow and the light start to read together. A lot of underpainting for me is just a study. I can always cover it up now with pastel. So I never worry too much about it. It's a road map for me. And I know enough about my pastel strokes as to what I'm going to do over it to lead the eye to look through to the paper. And shadows, no, we don't want line, we don't want hard edges and shadows. So you saw me take out the shadow there and put it right into the shadow of the orange. Okay, so this will end here just in a second, couple of minutes. Okay, see that, what I just put there, that orange, it jumped off. That's what I want. I want the underpainting to be a whole series of grade colors so that I have somewhere to go, and that is to tell me where I'm going with the saturation. All right, that was my studio, quick glimpse of my studio. Here's a quick pastel block in, just a few minutes, and then we'll go back to slides. But you see that dark that I put there? That was really important. I'm gauging all the darks to that one stroke of dark. And then I'm gauging all the lights to the one light that I put up above. I'm not staying in one place, but I'm moving all around quickly. Some people can take some objects and just render, like start with an eye and render all the way out. But another way, I'd say a more common way, is to do this, which is almost color spots, where you're making comparisons. You're taking your best guess and saying, what color, what value is this compared to that? I'm trying to get just the big feel of the mass of lights to the shadows. For years, I never used the side of a pastel at all. I did it all with the tip of a pastel. Now we have these bigger blocky pastels, and we often are just scumbling in big shapes, which is kind of fun. And in that this was a demo, I was doing it that way. But different kind of mark making. There was purple in the back. I try not to stay too long in one place, but to move around, because that's how you compare and see and get the whole thing moving at the same time. Okay, now as I start to put the lights on, they're jumping off because the underneath structure is being established. I'm interested in creating light, and light needs contrast. It's hard to get light with pastels if you don't have some good, rich, contrasting dark shapes. Okay, there's about a minute left here. I'm trying to indicate to myself what's the light shape versus the dark shape there. Big, broad, mass to mass to mass. Sometimes they go back and restate a dark so that the light relationship will jump off. See how that's a light surrounded by darks. Therefore, it's going to sing a little better. We have to be aware of saturation, value, temperature, and so on. But we want the shadows more simple and do more of our main work in the light. That's where people generally will look, unless you're doing backlight. And then I put that dark back down there. Okay, so that was a quick, but I think I show you here the finish, how broad I was trying to make that, how simple it started. Okay, now to go back out of here, Leon, how do I do that? I don't want to leave the meeting, but I want to go back to.
Go up, excuse me, go up to the top and where
I'm
you
at
want
the top, but it won't.
what are you
I
trying
can't.
to do?
I don't see a toolbar to let me close it.
Oh, you want to stop sharing? Is that what you want to do?
No, I just want to close this demo and go back to the slideshow.
Oh, okay.
At that point, did anyone have a question or two at this point? Because that was more the technical side of what I was showing you, my progression of thinking, that I was pretty technically thinking about technical issues for a long time. And then it changes. So I wondered if anyone had a thought there. I was showing you process as well.
Sally, it's Evelyn. I have a question about gouache. You were using quite a bit of it. Does the pastel adhere to it well, or does it not fill the
Yes.
tooth?
And what I didn't know is gouache is a really was a old medium mixed with used for pastel painting going way back. So it's making a resurgence. And it dries kind of matte, and it's got a really interesting way to take the stroke of the pastel.
Thank you.
Okay.
On a related note, Sally,
Mm-hmm.
the paper you were using that you said I don't know if it was watercolor paper, that you gessoed the back and then did the watercolor or gouache on the front.
Well, it wasn't gouache. I was rubbing oil paint actually, or acrylic paint. on with a rag to get that look. But so that it, in those days we didn't have mounted paper. So I gessoed the back of printmaking paper. My mother was a printmaker, and I had all this Reeves BFK, which is smooth. So when I did the pastel, I had to do it very just thin layers of pastel. It wouldn't take a lot, but it caused interesting, look. All right, so I'm going to go on because I don't want to run out of time here and keep you too long. Different shows, and you can see that other one was a museum show. This is a different museum show. And some of these are pieces that were including things I did in the MFA. So it begins to change. Things begin to change. I started these on the right are in oil, and then some of these on the left are in pastel. And when I finally came to a place, I was, gosh, probably 50 years old or more, decided to go to get an MFA. Usually you do that if you want to teach at the college level, and everybody else was 30 years old. But I wanted to grow, and I wasn't sure where or how. I just felt like I'd spent all those years thinking how to make a tree look like a tree. I was thinking of how to improve my drawing. It was all skill-based, but I felt that there was more somehow, and I wanted to explore that. So I put myself in there, and a lot of things influenced me and changed things. So that's what I'm just going to kind of wrap up here with. But I'm going to show you, I don't often do portraiture, but I ended up painting. I wasn't painting the models that everybody else was painting. I was painting the students. I was watching people around the room, and this girl had bright red hair, and I made a red bracelet on her. But you can see things changing as I'm using a lot of this is gouache underneath with more expressive strokes on top. I was taking all those years of technical thinking, but trying not to think so technical anymore. This changes a little bit. Here is just a quick view of my MFA exhibition and some of the sizes of some of those pieces. The one on the left is really big and long, and I was experimenting with space and and then all kinds of dichotomy things like old, and yeah, this is my family. Everything started to come out of a personal place. There was my mother aging and in the darker room and coming out, and my son in the far back, and my husband, and everything's bent. I'm looking at reality differently. And this one really differently, because instead of the series where I was up on the edge of the swimming pool looking at people in the water, this time I was in the water. I was swimming on my back, and I kept looking up at this man from an ant's eye point of view. I mean, below ant's eye view. And I go up and down and come back, and his head turned this way, his head turned that way. But I was totally fascinated. I wanted to, I'm not into making pretty pictures. I want to make interesting pictures from my own heart. And so I was interested in the fact that more contemporary realism became more flat in space was modernism, not so worried about turning form. So here I have both, but I compressed space and brought my best friend's house behind that was up on the hill forward. And she passed away, and I wanted my memories of her as I would swim and look up at her house in there. And I made this whole lower left corner a bunch of stuff. I painted it out and in and out and in, but it's a real abstract bunch of shapes where everything is compressed. And so there's been a number of articles written about this, just because I'm breaking all the rules by having the focal point go out of the picture on the right. I got interested in learning about my own art historical lineage, which I didn't know about before. Who were my influences? Why? What about them was influencing me? And I no longer was sending my work to galleries. I was painting for myself for the first time and experimenting with things. So you can see that like Fairfield Porter, many of these guys, Edward Hopper, they were doing very abstract shapes combined with realism. And then I started painting my own life. And my mother was my great inspiration. She was an artist. I grew up in her art studio. We were always together in the art studio. And she was aging, and I was going to have to move her out of her place. And I did a painting of her after we spent 2 months in her studio, taking all 90 years of her art equipment and things away. And so here's the empty shelves. And I made this from me as a child looking up at her. There's a clock in the back. And one woman that looked at this said, "She looks lost." And I said, "Yeah, we dismantled her art studio." And, so I was starting to tap into inner feelings of my own instead of just reporting on the world. So here is my mom, and I got the inspiration from Velasquez Las Meninas, and that's a mirror behind. So you see me sitting in the front in the right corner, I'm painting her, but I had the strongest need to put my head in the composition, like Las Meninas, where you see the painter himself is in the back reflected. And it was a real strong pull because we were like this, and artistically she influenced me, and so I have my head there, and so there's multiple layers. That was oil. And then one day I was there as we were packing up her apartment, and I walked into the kitchen and she was outside, and I just stood in the kitchen and watched her say goodbye to her home as she was washing this window. And so I knew I had a painting as I watched this, and I created the foreground with things that are hers, her cups, her knives, the sink, my painting in the upper right corner to reference us as both artists. And I put in all this pastel, and then I thought, I'm going to hold my breath and see if I can smear it, and that'll work right. And it did. But when I exhibited this in New York, I was shocked because I got so many emails and letters from people writing me because it touched a nerve. They were talking about their mothers, and they wanted to tell me their stories. And one man told me that he saw this painting from across the room, and it reminded him of his mother, and he said he couldn't look at it. He had to walk around the room for a while and come back before he could engage in it because it brought up all the memories of his own mom. And so I realized I'd struck on a chord that's a universal theme in art, and it was no longer just being so technical. And then that's expanded into my own family. I just was painting my own family, and we were on vacation. Here was my son, and I learned about synchronicity and time passing in a single image. And you see this in art historical paintings. And so I tried this. This is multiple moments in one painting. And I did this on a board. It's an oil paint. My husband is stepping out of, when you look down a hall, there's all kinds of significance about rooms that I learned about in art history. So pulling you from one room to the next, and stop a moment in time as he's turning. And the same idea, then my mother passed away. And it was grieving for me, but my niece had a baby. And I thought, it was Mother's Day. I started this painting on Mother's Day, and it was the idea of painting a new beginning. Life starts over. And she was watching a mother, move your baby around, and it was multiple moments in the passing of time. And then finally here, my son, I got to take a little, he had been around the world on a trip after working many, many hard years in his profession. And he called me up and said, Mom, it's your birthday. Will you come over? And to be just with my son and the two of us, it was special. So one day we were laying on the beach and the sun was going down at our feet. And I just turned my head and I saw him in like this, and I saw the light on the beach and on the towel, and I looked at the shapes, and but I was wondering, as a mom, what was going on in this young man's world, in his heart, in his mind, what he was thinking. And I knew I was going to paint this, and so then I made up the clouds and all of that. It was kind of him in repose, but it had special meaning to me. I called it Journey because I didn't know what was going to happen or the choices he would make going forward in life. And then finally, here's this a painting. Again, I'm interested in these little mundane things that people might see in life, but that are overlooked. And I'm so fascinated by looking through water at refraction, but what about the shower door? And here, there's steam and there's little drops of water, and you see a figure in there, just ever so slightly. And I'm just going to tell you in closing that in this current issue of Pastel Journal, they asked me to write this little article you might find interesting. It's referencing some of the things I was talking to you about today. Ann Heavener, the editor, is doing a series called Game Changer. And she posed a very interesting, what I thought was an interesting question about, she asked me, what was a moment in time? She knows I've been painting for decades. Okay, so she says, what was a kind of an aha moment in your art career, and a timing, something that maybe was a game changer? And I sent her several ideas, but this is the one we came onto, and it has to do with the fact that early in my career, so I'm coming full circle around, I wanted to create light, but I had no darks in the pastel. I was new to pastel. And I thought, but what am I trying to achieve? And I wanted to achieve the light. So I learned how to take paint and create the final outcome with the materials that I had. And so she took my ideas and wrote this article about not being overly focused on technique at the expense of content. You might find that interesting. Okay, so there's some of so in closing, it looks like we're right at the end of the time. Does anyone have a question for me at all? I don't know if you need to end right at this moment, but if you want to ask me anything.
What pastels do you mostly use?
I use a lot of Giraud, and let's see, amazingly, Rembrandt. I mean, I spent my whole first 20 years, I only had Rembrandt. There wasn't anything else to use that I knew of in those days, and we didn't even have sanded papers. That's why I was working on watercolor. I learned how to, Doug Dawson gave me a recipe with marble dust and acrylic medium to make a kind of a pumice gridded surface. But you are so lucky now that you have too many choices. You have all these different papers and many different pastels. But I just want to say, and I guess the point of my article is that you don't have to have all those things, although we want them, but you don't have to have them. You have to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and then use the materials that you have.
Sally, I told you about my aha moment at the IAPS convention, and I have this in my dining room. This is from your workshop in, I think, Santa Clara 10 years ago, 2014. Oh. And the bowl turned. And when I felt like, oh my God, I could get the bowl to turn, that was an aha moment. You did a plum, you did a demo of a plum, and it went from a cube because you were using straight lines. It went from a cube to a round plum, and we all went, wait, what happened? You went, it's like that.
Oh, thank you for that memory.
That was such a great workshop with the color gels and everything. It was just amazing.
Yeah, that was the point I was making, was that my understanding of how color of the light influences your color, and you have to figure out what that is. Thank you.
And I liked your iterative approach. You'd say, okay, well, you know, you don't know what it is. It's a green, just a green. Yeah. Now, what kind of green is it? What do you need it to be? What's the next step? The next step.
Wow, you were a good student.
That was a great workshop.
Thank you.
Well, Sally,
I was wondering, how much you work from photographs, or how much you work from life? You work quite a bit from photographs?
Well, for years and years and years, life. And the best advice in a good art school is to work from life. And the great illustrator, I forgot his name, but he said he observed that it takes a good 10 years for students to understand value, and they need to work from life, because when you go to photography, you have to have that knowledge in your back hip in order to be able to, in your back pocket, I should say, in order to be able to fix what the camera can't see. So I would say do a few pieces with photography and then set up a still life or some natural object and work from life, and you'll be shocked at what you see, and it will help your painting. So I try to do that, go back and forth. Great question. Any other questions? We finished?
I have one quick question. I'm looking now. Does your studio now have a north light coming in?
Well, right now it's about 7 o'clock at night, but yes, I got a north light. I'm always in a garage. I have 2 different studios. We have a farm, and this one, but wherever we move, I put in a skylight.
Okay.
And some natural light along with some other bulbs.
Okay, that's good to know. And I just want to thank you. I don't know if I'm going to ask you for a third time, maybe if we're still here in 5 years.
Oh, you will be.
But it's wonderful from the last time to this time. You have a different perspective and a growth. And for you to talk about going full cycle from where you were and through all your different stages back to where you are now is just so inspiring and enlightening. And thank you so much. I know you just came in yesterday from other travel IAPs, so thank you for giving up all this time, and yay.
Thank you for having me. You're a wonderful group, and I appreciate all of you. Thank you.